So, welcome back to Consistently Candid. I'm here with Holly Elmore. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, do you want to? Yeah, I usually just start by asking people for like a little introduction to themselves and their background and what they're doing at the moment.
Yeah, so what I'm doing at the moment is PauseAI US. So there's PauseAI International, or I think we're calling it PauseAI Global now, and I'm in charge of the US chapter, which I just incorporated. I was just this week appointed the executive director of
that.
it,
Congratulations.
which is really nice. Yeah, so PauseAI's mission is, or our ask is a global indefinite pause on frontier AI projects. How did I get here is kind of like a long and winding road. I've done a lot of different things. I have a PhD in evolutionary biology, but I really feel like the reason I'm here is just because like I'm a citizen of Earth, like, and I don't want these dangerous experiments to be going on for me or for everyone else. And I was really inspired to get into this last year when I saw some polls after there was a lot of talk about pause because of the Future of Life Institute's pause letter, open letter coming out. And there were some polls on, of American adults asking, would you like to see regulation on AI or not? And there were just these really high margins, like 72% overall were like, yes, regulation. Whereas in AI safety, people had always said before that like the public and like elected representatives don't really understand this issue. And so we can't really pursue things that depend on their understanding. I saw that as like, wow, things have changed. Like it's time to move into that direction. And I didn't think I was like the person to do it, but just gradually it became clear that nobody else was going to go into grassroots public movement type stuff. And so I did that. And then, yeah, so here we are now. I'm working on like the legal side of the org. Our programming, the most visible programming is protests. So I've run 3 of those. I think that about covers it for an intro.
Yeah, awesome. I guess like a pretty broad question is like, how do you feel like it's going? Like, how do you feel like not maybe just like PauseAI, the organization specifically, but in terms of like advocating for a pause, moving that like further in the Overton window, like getting it eventually. How optimistic are you feeling versus maybe like say a year ago? Because obviously like a lot has happened in the last year. Some of it good, some of it like less good. But yeah, how are you like feeling overall about it?
Yeah, I am in many ways it's greatly exceeded my expectations. Like I can't believe how open the public. I can't, especially after so many years being around the AI safety community. I've been exposed to this for like over 10 years. It was in like 2013 that I first got involved in effective altruism, and that's where I was introduced to the AI safety issue. And so I've been like sort of part of this community, not working on it for a very long time. And they were just so pessimistic on public engagement on this issue. And they were really, I didn't try to talk to general public people about this very much, but people were very convinced that like they're hostile to it, they're not going to get it. It's just like a waste of our resources. In fact, if you do bring it up with members of the public or like elected officials, it's going to backfire and it's going to mean that like everybody working on it is going to seem crazy, and so they're not going to be able to go further like in working on getting like the career capital that they need or to work on this issue. Like they need to kind of do that without having it called attention to that they believe this crazy thing or this thing that the public thinks is crazy. So there was so much skepticism of that approach that like this year I've just thought like, wow, people, the average response that I get from like a member of the public is just so reasonable to me. Like they're just like, whoa, that sounds really dangerous. Like we shouldn't do that, or we should, step back and make sure that it's safe before we go ahead. So that's been incredibly heartening. There's a lot of poll results to get a more formal sense of where people are on that. But probably the thing that gives me the most optimism is just talking to people, at like events where we like hand out flyers or something like that, or talking to people, telling people telling the dental hygienist the other day, like what I do for work and like how interested she was and like the take she had. When we prepared for the OpenAI protest earlier this month, I had somebody go and like make sure that like do what he could to figure out that we were like definitely allowed to stand where we were planning to stand, that sort of thing. This is definitely the OpenAI building. And he talked to a security guard to like ask if we would be trespassing if we, stood where we were planning to stand. And they got into a conversation, and he was concerned about job loss. He like shared the concerns of the protest. And to me, like a lot of what I hear from those people is like more reasonable than what I hear from like highly educated tech people. And so like there's just a willingness to be like, whoa, like they can't do that. Whereas like when you talk to the people who are really like insiders in the tech world, it's kind of like, well, how can you stop progress? Or, it's just, I mean, I think a pause would be good, but like it's just not feasible. And whereas like the average person is just like, yeah, like why don't we stop that? Like we stop dangerous stuff all the time. So that makes me feel super hopeful. There's some stuff that has been harder than I expected. Like actually the sort of insider resistance has been a lot more challenging than I thought. I just thought that like the whole community was like going to see this opportunity to talk to the public and like see the power of it. But actually a lot of people like strongly disagree, and that has been like just a lot of time spent like for me. And I wonder how much it's worth engaging with the old guard who just don't really want to do public messaging. For at first, the reason I thought was that the public wouldn't understand, but now it seems like they do understand. And like there's still a lot of resistance to it. There's resistance to the way that you communicate in advocacy. Like a lot of people who've been in AI safety for a long time are not comfortable with short messages that don't like include all the caveats, like what I like to call like the low resolution version. Like I don't think that often, I really think that the low resolution version is like more true than like a longer version, but that doesn't cover all the details. I keep meaning to write a post about this, but yeah, there's a lot of like discomfort with like protest tactics and like protest messaging, and like a lot of what I can only describe as like anxiety about it. Like, and so there's a lot of I get, like messages like in the middle of the night where people are like, I don't agree with this sentence in this post, and so I don't know if I can come to the protest. And like that's a lot. That's like pretty hard. Yeah. I guess there's a lot of anxiety for people who've been working on this for a long time about like, where is this going? Like, what do we do now? Like, who are we now? And like, I just did not expect that to be like such a big thing. So that's a lot tougher. That's just a completely unanticipated difficulty that I've had. I also thought, like EA Rationality like would be totally into this, and I have their resources, and they just weren't at the beginning, at least. And now I think that was kind of a blessing in disguise, because this is much bigger than just those communities. Like you don't have to have the other convictions, of those communities to think that pausing AI is the right thing to do. And I want PauseAI to just be a coalition of people who think it would be good to pause AI, and like that's the only requirement. So I like that it's importantly free, sort of a lot of those influence. Well, it's not free of those influences, because I was very influenced by those things, but it's more separate than I had originally envisioned. But doing it more on my own like was harder than expected. I really just thought this would be like the next step in like what the AI safety community did, and like it's turned out to be kind of a different branch.
Yeah, that's interesting, like what you're saying about people having this anxiety around doing advocacy. Like, I don't know, I'm kind of just looking at this from the outside, but maybe it's something to do with I feel like there's a lot of ineffective altruism. There's this like fixation on being super precise all the time in your like messaging and in like your strategy and everything. And there's something about doing protests which you just kind of can't be like that. You just like you have to like slightly water down the message, and you have to be like, if you're going to put something on a sign, it can't have like 10 like asterisks and like
people literally put footnotes on their signs who come to.
That's really funny.
I know. And I think like this is such a good like object lesson, because that nobody can read these footnotes, but like it's important to you that they be there. It's not really about the reader getting the full. It's like there's this. Yeah, there've been a number of things that have made me think like, oh, okay, sort of the my like rationalist attendees, like they sort of view the real point of the protest as like the documents that I write to support the protest. And I think the real point of the protest is like the people being there. So like I write documents like press releases and just information like description for the event and things like that. And then for two of them, I've had a website that goes with it that explains more like what are the gripes against Meta, what are the gripes against OpenAI, and they're really focused on that. Like that's the real thing, and like the protest is just sort of like amplifying like exactly what's written there. And I just think like, I mean, that stuff is so ephemeral as far as I mean, it's there's like multiple aspects to a protest, but all of the writing stuff is pegged toward like the news, and it's mainly like an invitation for media to cover it. And that means that you have to, contextualize it and like, why is this happening right now? Like, why is this news? And then like, so usually the small ask of the protest is something topical. The other function of the small ask is something that's like entirely within the control of the person or the group that you're protesting. So like for OpenAI, it was stop working with militaries. They had just started working with militaries. So that was the small ask, and that's something that's completely in their control. Whereas the big ask is always PauseAI, and that's not in the control of any one entity that we're gonna protest, but that's our big message. And then like my sense from talking to people who have heard of the protests, or like they're meeting me for the first time and they're like, did you do that protest? Like, is that they only know PauseAI. Like they don't know almost anything else about what was the messaging of the protest, or, what I contacted the press about, or like kind of suggested that they use as the news hook. Like they don't, I think most people, if they get anything from the content of the protesters, it's just that the name was PauseAI of the group, and the group has our policy, ask in it, the name does. So yeah, so like I'm not that worried about that stuff. I mean, my model of like what communication is happening is like the biggest pass is just PauseAI, and like people are upset at this AI company, and that's like the main thing that I'm happy for people to know. And then there's like anyone who wants to dig deeper into it, like you can see like laid out like what are the problems. And then if OpenAI wanted to try to satisfy us, we give them a small demand that they could fulfill. You pretty much don't expect them to do the small demand in this kind of protests. Like if you want them to do the small demand, generally you have to do a lot more targeted work that sort of shows that you could like make life hard for them, or have like petitions or something. You have like a lot of work to support, show them that like, do like corporate campaign style, where like there's a threat that like that this group can really make life difficult for them, or it can like make things hard among their shareholders or something if they don't do what they want. I don't expect them to usually do the weak ask, but yeah, so there's a huge difference in like understanding of communication style. And well, I could spend, it feels like the conversations about this, I mean, it's just like so much work, like unpacking so much inferential distance. And it kind of feels pointless, because when you talk to like most people from the general public, like they have kind of an intuitive grasp of how this works. And like they generally don't have an expectation that like they have to agree with everything that was said in all the materials of the protest in order to show up. Like, I'm not convinced it's like a general problem that people don't have familiarity with advocacy. It's like made just a very like interesting historical thing that like people working on AI safety have very much one kind of mindset, and it's like technical implementation. That was the technical route was kind of believed to be the only thing available for a long time to deal with AI danger. But yeah, now there's widespread confusion about what the purpose of protests are. Like just the other day, I was having a discussion on Twitter where a common sentiment was voiced that it's really important that we distinguish X risk from AI ethics for some reason. Like, because if we're talking about AI ethics, then people will think that that's our crux and not X risk, and then they'll be satisfied with solutions for AI ethics but not X risk. And I like to point out that pause would help both of those things, so you don't really have to decide on this policy ask. But there's also like an assumption there, like if I dig deeper into what people are really thinking about that, like there's this like assumption there that you have to lead with your main objection. And I think sometimes that's like a moral thing, like that is kind of a moral thing. And like rationality, you're supposed to like go with your true objection and not a bunch of others. But there's this idea that it like waters down your argument to have a lot of things that would be helped by your argument. And I think in policy, it's like totally the opposite. Like that's like good coalition conditions. That's like this policy like helps a lot of things. Great. Like that's awesome. And I think it's good for messaging. That's my guess. I'm no expert on this, but like there's just a real difference in intuitions there, that like more precision on the one hand, there's this idea like that more precision is necessary, like always. And I think like actually in advocacy, like that might not be true.
Yeah. I think you're definitely right that like strategically it makes way more sense to target different audiences with like different threats. Like it's kind of funny. Like you'd think that saying AI is going to kill us would get everyone's attention, but it seems like sometimes if you're trying to get the attention of a politician, you can say AI is going to kill us and they won't care that much, but you can be like, AI might mean that you get deep in a compromising position in election season, and they're like, oh no. And you can like get their attention that way. So like I think it's totally fine to mix up the messaging depending on who you're trying to resonate with.
Well, yeah, and I try to explain in these situations that like I don't consider those to be like unrelated issues. Like I think like the problem is we're making this like super powerful technology really fast and we don't know what's going to happen. And like one thing that there's just all kinds of things that could happen, like our society could be messed up and we could get like into situations we don't want to. It could kill us, like all of those things seem like super related to me. Like they don't seem distinct. I mean, I often feel like people who like find it important to dismiss the AI ethics concerns just like don't agree in other ways with that, like algorithmic bias is a problem. Like, I just think like I just welcome people to like, if they're concerned about something affecting society, like from the rapid development of AI, like pausing is called for, Yeah. I even think like, it's not even like in a broad sense, like pausing AI is a policy, but like, I think of it as like, this is just the right like frame for dealing. We have like the choice to go ahead with like developing a new technology. Should we just go as fast as we can or not? Like, and I think like our position from the beginning should be like, no, we should monitor this. We should have a sense of like if it's dangerous, and we should only be willing to go ahead if we have like a reasonable assurance that it can be done safely. So like, I don't even really see it as like advocating like a particular, it is a policy, but like, but also I guess in the same sense that we have policy to just like, like YOLO, go ahead as fast as you can. Like, seeing that as the default, I think is like the deepest issue, or thinking that, oh, this is how like progress works or something. And so you just have to let things go as fast as like profit motive will allow, or like people's interest in this technology will allow, instead of like, we have a right as humans to say stop. You're imposing a lot of externalities on us, and like that's not okay.
Yeah, I agree. I've said this before, but like I really, really hate the fatalism that is like that comes across just in the way that people talk about AGI, like especially the word arrival. I've said this before, but people are like, AGI is going to arrive in year X, and it's like, no, because it's not going to arrive if we don't make it. Like,
yeah, there's just the complete like loss of agency,
self-fulfilling ideology that's like the people that are trying to make it have decided that it's inevitable that we're going to make it because they want to make it. So that's where the whole thing's come from. And now it's like being portrayed as this rule of nature that at some point this thing is just going to arise and we don't even really have any control over when that's going to happen. And that's just like obviously wrong.
Yeah, I agree. And like both, for a long time, like the people making AGI and the people who were concerned about safety, mainly alignment, both had this mentality. Like, and that was why like alignment, or part of why alignment was like the only way forward, because it was just inevitable that AGI would get built. But the only solution would have to be like another technical thing. Like you would have to come up with this innovation of alignment and like get it in there and maybe like make it more competitive somehow, than, even though you would think it would inherently be at a disadvantage, like an aligned AI anyway, like, but that's maybe too much to get into, but like, there was just that assumption on both sides that like, of course, this is like the march of progress, like it will be discovered. It's just a matter of time. In a way, I think that's true. Like, I think like if the civilization doesn't get destroyed, like probably eventually it'll like discover, even like saying things like the tech tree like is too deterministic or too like, or too like, what am I, like as if it was inevitable or something. Like I think there's, in reality, there's like many tech trees that could be realized, but I do think like with enough time and without destroying itself first, it seems likely that something like this, there's going to be a desire for this kind of technology, that people will keep pursuing it, and like you'll eventually get it. And I get like talking in economic terms about like I think EA did a lot to promote this way of thinking, because like in assessing the impact of different innovations, like instead of being, they didn't like 80,000 hours, for instance, like did a lot of articles looking at like, not okay, like what's the impact of this having been invented at all, but like what's the impact of this having been invented like that much sooner than somebody else would have invented it. And a lot of the impact calculations are just like that, and it does kind of put in mind that there's like some kind of destiny to like what technology gets invented, and that it's kind of inevitable. All you can really do to improve things is like accelerate that timeline, and then that's definitely like what the like effective accelerationists are saying, is that like it's just about going faster, like through basically a predetermined like slate of technologies.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be, I don't know, I think like my gut intuition is just kind of like, if you recognize that you're in a dangerous situation, you just do everything you can to slam the brakes, and you kind of figure out the rest later. Yeah. Like maybe that seems naive. People will be like, oh, but if we pause, then what happens X years down the line when this happens? Or what if someone breaks the pause? Or what if this and what if that? It's kind of like, I agree that those things are all really important, but like it seems like the priority should be buy yourself time to figure out what you would do in that situation, rather than just kind of like, it just seems like the logical, like self-preserving thing to do is just to be like, okay, everybody stop. Like, let's take some more time to figure this out. And yeah, I'm confused why more people don't seem to have that instinct.
I think it's weird, because I sort of think what's causing it is there's a sort of like pausey instinct that those people have, but they think that the pausing is just like not doing the pause, like, or like not like, they're like, oh, that would be like a really big action to take, like let's hang back. But there's just huge status quo bias to like I think like, yeah, okay, what if like somebody breaks the pause? What if in 80 years we like, some people bring up to me like, what if we never get AGI because a pause is so effective, and like we miss out on all those benefits? And I just think like, okay, but like what if we do nothing and we just have a crisis, and and we have no guarantee of getting through that? That seems to me like the biggest issue right now, and that pause like buys us lots of options. Not that it doesn't close any doors, but yeah, but I guess it's status quo bias, honestly, is like what I would attribute it to. There's a lot of like, it's, people are just used to this state as like the default. Like I hear things like from people who I'm really surprised would say something like this, but just like, well, what do you expect? They're a for-profit company. Like, of course they're gonna try to. So I was like, what? Like, why are you so like defeated on this? Like, of course we can do something about for-profit companies doing bad things and endangering us.
This is like why we have governments, right?
Yeah, but I think a lot of people in AI safety are pretty libertarian, and they don't want the answer to be government. Or like they have such low confidence in like what governments can achieve. Like they just imagine like the government trying to get involved, just like inevitably making it worse. And I think that's like a very uninvestigated like instinct that they have. Like I have these conversations a lot where I'm like, well, I think a number of agencies have done a good job at like regulating things, and they just don't really know about them. Like they're not interested. Yeah, so there's a lot of like skepticism about what governments can do. That seems like a big crux, between like my position, which I don't think is like excessively hopeful about government intervention, but this is the kind of thing I really think governments can do, like slow down industries. And normally the problem with regulation is that there's like too much of a penalty to efficiency or something in the industry, but I'm just fine with imposing that. And I find the arguments that that's going to somehow accelerate, AI development pretty tortured. But I do hear that, like, or that it's going to make it so people have to only focus on ineffective safety. Oh, another crux is that I don't really feel that almost any safety research that's being done is like probably going to solve it. So like, I don't really want to hear much about like making new alignment researchers. Like I'm actually pretty negative on like the paradigm of alignment now. For all these years, like being around the AI safety community, I can't believe that I didn't question this earlier, but I really did just receive the wisdom that like, oh yeah, what we're supposed to do about dangerous AI is alignment rather than just like not making it, like it didn't really seem like an option to me until last year. And then I was like, yes, it's an option if you can talk to other people about it. I understand how if you feel like you can't talk to people about it, your only chance is to like be in control of the tech or something, and like that's alignment. But like, what is alignment? It just is it? I think aligned to whom is a question that gets brushed off a lot, but like seriously, aligned to whom? I mean, like, do we have like a coherent enough like shared human value function to? And even if you had like a god that knew how to do like what we wanted or what was good for us, like doesn't that like take away our agency fundamentally? Like is that even desirable? Like there's just so much that's unsatisfactory about getting alignment if you could. And then like on top of that, sort of a lot of what's called alignment research or safety research today is really not even that. It's not trying to like fundamentally make sure that the models like want what we want or like will do what are good for us. It's like really cosmetic surgery on like what they do after they've been trained according to some like we don't know what kind of like values they're are like throughout their data set, what they're finding. So yeah, that's another thing is that I don't really see solutions that like a small community of smart people can just implement by themselves. Like I really only see like telling the world and getting them to respond by creating more time either for people to figure out like more enduring technical solutions or just stopping it at, for as long as we need.
Yeah, I do. It's so funny when people are like, if the two options are like, try to get the God machine to do what you want, or don't build the God machine. Like the second one to me just intuitively sounds way easier. Like yeah. People seem to have the exact opposite intuition where they're like, oh no, coordination is the hardest thing ever. But like trying to solve this like scientific problem that we don't even know whether it's solvable in principle or not, of like making something that's infinitely smarter than you do what you want. Like, oh yeah, that's definitely we can do that. Or maybe that's like the least bad option here. And I'm like, are you serious? Like
I know. I've had the same. I realized like pretty early when I started like trying to get people interested in doing pause stuff, like this is basically a lot of people in AI safety think that coordination problems are not solvable, but technical problems are. And like, they're not really willing to revise that. Even like as the technical problem got way, way harder, like we learned more about what it would take. Also, the philosophical confusion at the heart of it became more clear. Coordination problem seems to have gotten easier. You can at least, this is in the Overton window now. But yeah, there's like a real reluctance to like go in the direction of solving the coordination problem. There's also like the matter of like many people in AI safety who are like attracted there by Eliezer, have also read the sequences and like share that philosophy. And there's actually not that much in the sequences about how politics are corrupting. There's like one essay called Politics or the Mind Killer. It's very short. But that just, people point to that like, oh, that settles it, you know, politics or the mind killer. Like we just can't. And I hear a lot of elaborations on that are like, if you kind of allow that thinking in at all, it's going to corrupt your ability to think clearly. And I definitely see that anxiety about protests. Like people feel like, oh my God, if I like allow myself to do this thing where I'm like, rah, 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 you know, for this cause, like, will I be able to like think objectively later? Which on the one hand, I think this is good to be aware of, but on the other hand, it's very frustrating to me because it's obvious that they do engage in a lot of political thinking already. They just don't think of it as political. It's like the only stuff that seems to count as political thinking to them is like engaging with normies, you know, like, or like stuff that is labeled politics, like by like the newspaper, like, whereas like, I feel like there's a ton of politics going on with what kind of messaging we do in the AI safety community. Like, do we focus on, you know, technical research or not? What technical areas are considered cool? You know, what jobs are acceptable to have? Like all of that is like highly political, but like if they don't see it that way, I think like the same like dangers apply to their thinking. But I also think like, I don't think it's as serious of a contaminant as they think. Like I'm just more okay with like, of course, that's like part of the human psyche at like all times. Like you have to be managing that and like open to discovering that that's going on in your thinking, and like have the intention, you know, not to let that like affect your apprehension of like what's truly going on. But I just don't see it as such like a one-way street. Like once you step foot on the road of politics, it's over. But I over and over again, I've seen that like relating to the protests.
Yeah. I think I'm pretty, well, this is like a whole separate topic, but I'm pretty skeptical that you could have purely distilled rational thinking where you've managed to extricate yourself from politics completely. I don't think that's possible. Or like maybe not even like that desirable either. I don't know, but I feel like that's a whole other thing. Yeah, that's interesting though. I don't think I've realized that kind of thinking was maybe contributing to the whole anti-public advocacy thing.
Yeah, and like I feel a little bit bad like exposing that, but like I kind of think people should know that this is a strain of like, I don't know, if you read these like back and forth threads, like I think people should kind of know, like, yeah, there's with a lot of like the rationalists, like Yudkowsky, AI safety, like that pipeline is like wanting the singularity to realizing there's this problem and like being all about alignment, and like Eliezer himself is like given up on alignment and wants there to just be a stop, is how he prefers to put it. But like a lot of people who like came along for that ride, like there's a lot of other assumptions and like personality similarities there and stuff, and a lot of people who were attracted to what that philosophy was doing for a long time are just dispositionally like extremely antsy about anything that feels like persuasion, anything that isn't just laying out like the mechanisms of an argument. Yeah, there's of course I don't think that makes them immune to having like political biases and stuff, and I think that they do. So
yeah, I'm wondering like, yeah, going more back to like how the pause stuff is going. Like I think I sometimes worry that like I see these opinion polls and stuff which are like, you know, 70% of people or whatever want to slow down, and that kind of makes me like kind of optimistic for a bit, but then I wonder how much stock we should be putting in those, because my perception, just being someone who like when I'm not on Twitter like lives very much outside of this whole world, is that like most people, like if you sat them down and you were like, and you put the argument to them that it's bad to create a super intelligent thing you don't control, they'd be like, yeah, I can see that seems bad. But like they don't have the like emotional connection to it, and they don't actually think about it most of the time. And I think most people I know, like they think that chatbots are like kind of cool and uncanny, but like a little bit gimmicky, and like they haven't extrapolated that progress forward in their head, and they're not thinking like that it's something that's going to affect them So like, I don't know. I mean, this is like completely. It's very difficult to tell because everyone's in a different social bubble. But like, yeah, I'm worried that people are like not. They actually don't care about this as much as you might think if you're like in the like safety sphere that's thinking about it a lot. And I also worry that governments. I don't know. Like I've kind of like looked into like when the UK AI Safety Summit happened last year, I thought that was great. Like, it was amazing to even hear the government like recognize existential risk, and for like Rishi Sunak to seem genuinely quite kind of freaked out by it, and I was like, that's fantastic.
Mhm.
But then like when you look at like what actually came out of that, like there weren't like there wasn't much that was very concrete. Like nothing that I thought signaled strong regulation coming in like anytime soon. And I was scrutinizing some like, well, I got in a little bit of hot water for tweeting about a House of Lords Select Committee report, which I kind of mislabeled as being a government position and then realized it wasn't, had to go back on it. But there are a lot of like reports like that that you can read where the government are very like, yeah, it like they don't seem actually as concerned about this as they should be, or they'll kind of acknowledge that there are these risks, but then they'll say things like, we don't think the pause is like deliverable or like feasible, and like, yeah, we recognize these experts have said these alarm, find a safe way around it that's still like pro innovation or whatever, and then they don't have any like concrete suggestions of how they're actually going to mitigate it. So like, yeah, I'm like I'm like worried about like over indexing on like the pro pause position that you get from polls and things like that, even though I do think that's really important. But like, yeah, I don't know what you think about all of that.
Um, yeah, I expect there to be just like a sawtooth pattern to like anytime with any kind of opinion change at any level, like with an individual, there's like, oh, I really get it. And like, oh, okay, I'm not sure. And like, oh, I should really do some actions. I don't know. Like I've witnessed this a lot with so like an issue that has given me a lot of insight into like human psychology is I was a vegetarian from a young age for ethical reasons. And you just get to see a lot of like human irrationality from that position, like because there wasn't any pressure for the people around me to like have a good argument or anything. I mean, this was a very unpopular position like when I first adopted it, and I was a child, so I would hear like I would see adults like give me like the worst first reason that popped in their head, like why it was okay to eat meat or like why I should just eat meat, and I was like, oh, okay, like this is quite, I know for a fact, like you're being irrational, like even at a young age. So like that, I also witnessed like a lot of people over many years, like have their opinions change on the issue of, animal suffering because, and like, I was someone that they would like want to talk to about it. Like many people would like want to argue with me about it at first. And then they would kind of like take some time and then they'd be like, okay, maybe you're right. And then they would kind of like back and then like over like years. And then eventually they're like, okay, like, yeah, I'm like ready to do this. I want to like be a vegetarian. And then a year later, they're like completely forgetting that any of that happened. And like, same with like gay marriage, at least in the US, like this was, I witnessed this like as a teenager, like this was all going down like during my teen years. And the way that people, like I was my family is Episcopalian, and like I saw this in the Episcopal Church. Like there was this big controversy when like a bishop in the church came out as gay, and like he was not removed from his position. He was like allowed to stay, and that was a huge stance for the Episcopal Church to take. And like I remembered like there had to be like a lot of conservative sermons and stuff after that to like remind people that like it's okay, this is still like the church you recognize. And but none of those people like a couple years later at all remembered that they had been like upset about the gay bishop or anything. Like they're just like proud of the Episcopal Church for being ahead on this issue. So yeah, anyway, sorry, like long way of saying like I just with opinion change, like with individuals, with groups, with like countries, like it goes in this really stop and start way. And I would not have predicted 2 years ago that we would even see a poll that had like 30% approving of pausing AGI. Like that was so not what I predicted. So I feel like my perception is that we're like doing really well on this like super jagged graph of like how opinion change works. The other thing is that people don't, I think for this issue, the best thing that could happen is just if governments decided to take action before it's something people feel really strongly about. Like if it's just something that if you poll the country, 70% say like yes, regulation, there aren't really that many costs that they perceive like to them yet. Like if they're not used to using AI tools or something, or they don't work in the industry, like it's so far like kind of a concentrated industry that like doesn't have its hooks in like a ton of stuff. It's developing this new product. Like that might be ideal. Like it's better to just, if in this period when it's like where everybody sort of knows we're figuring out what our relationship will be to this tech, like if government like came out strong and said like you're going to have to, you know, go through these hoops to, you know, continue developing, you're going to have to like prove that this is safe, or there's going to be a moratorium on like this kind of development or something like that. I think that this is, you know, my personal like theory of change. I think that would be accepted, and that like that's compatible with having like high support but not like strong feeling support. And then what else? Oh, another thing I wanted to bring up from what you said is I think that like kind of the issue you were pointing to is a reason why also we shouldn't have a lot of faith in warning shots. Warning shots are this huge thing. Actually, a lot of people who are doing sort of the classical AI safety agenda and like working on technical stuff for now, believe that there will be a time when it's good to have activism, but it will come after more warning shots when it will be easier because the public will already just rise up and, you know, like, well, they'll just obviously see that this is unacceptable. And I think it is really important to realize that like people don't know how to interpret warning shots. Like you have to tell them what it would mean for something to happen for it to like work as a warning shot. Like technical people who understand the technology also kind of like get used to stuff and like don't, I think they're like the frog in the boiling water and don't react adequately to warning shots, but at least they understand like, oh, I had a model of how this worked and this is like violating that. But a lot of people don't know. Yeah, like they think it's fun to like talk to a chat bot. They don't know like what kind of technology has been, or they don't know what kind of like innovation or things that, you know, literally many experts thought might be impossible to recreate in a machine or something. They don't know that like that's what that means when you talk to the chatbot. Same as like with DALL-E images, like around the time that like DALL-E 3 came out, and there were a lot of images that, you know, there was a lot of talk about like, oh, is this going to put illustrators out of business? It was revealed that a lot of people thought that Photoshop worked that way already, like that you just give it a prompt and like they didn't realize that like a human had to know like mechanistically how to do, there were like AI elements to Photoshop, but like, you know, they didn't realize that a human had to like plan out how to do this. They had to like know how to, what transformation should be done where. And so like, yeah, that made me like super pessimistic about this idea that we can, an idea that a lot of people are relying on that will just like get a lot of public support for free because people will see that this is so bad. Like, I think that people, if you don't do the work to like set up and like show people, okay, here is why if we saw this, it would mean X and it would be bad. Like, because otherwise, like, a lot of people just don't have the models to realize like, oh no, this is violating my expectations. I think ChatGPT was a warning shot, but then people get used to it too. There's like amnesia about what they ever expected, kind of similar to gay marriage. Like people forget that they ever felt differently about gay marriage or that it ever seemed like maybe it's the wrong thing, like our society shouldn't do it. They just kind of remember that they like felt sympathetic toward gay people, and then that kind of becomes like, oh, I was always in favor of a gay marriage, like because obviously people should have all the same rights. And yeah, so that was a bit of a muddled response and I'm struggling to like pull it together, but yeah, public opinion, I guess.
Yeah, and the way that people adapt to like new insane developments in technology is really interesting. I can even like witness this in myself, like you know, like it's like you see something like Sora, the video generation thing that came out recently. Like I even like cynicism in myself where like obviously it's incredible that you can just feed a prompt to something and it can generate these videos, but I found myself being like trying to poke holes in it and being like, oh yeah, but like look at this glitch, or like look at this little mistake, like this is like, you know, like people just instinctively want to do that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they're like, oh, but look, this ant has 4 legs or whatever, and it's like
no one will ever fall for this.
Yeah, but it's like crazy that we can even do that. But then again, I think probably most people in my personal life didn't even know that was released and like wouldn't know what it was if I if I talked to them about it. So it's kind of like, I don't know. Yeah, with ChatGPT, it was the same thing. Like people for a bit were like, oh wow, it's so crazy. Like people were doing that really annoying gimmicky thing of like doing a speech and then being like, and this speech was generated by ChatGPT. Would you even have known? And everyone would be like, whoa. And then after a while, that became like just annoying, and people forgot that you could even do that. And like, I don't know. Just like the number of people who will point out the flaws in what ChatGPT can do, but they haven't even like subscribed to the premium version. That's my favorite. When they're like, oh look, 3.5 made this mistake, and they haven't even upgraded it. So yeah, I do think people are like updating on developments.
My favorite is when people are like, ChatGPT like has cognitive biases that are like literally like, you know, like it doesn't answer this riddle correctly that like most of the population doesn't, you know, or like most of the probably like people the first time they encounter it, like it's very high rates of falling for it. And like, I mean, to me, you're just showing me that it like thinks like a human, which is like,
yeah. Then people are like, oh, it made a mistake, and it's like, well, yeah, like obviously you, a perfect human, have never made a mistake in your entire life, so there's like nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and while you were talking to it was talking to thousands of other people. Like,
yeah,
that quality of, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, the warning shot thing is interesting as well, because it's kind of like almost perversely like some people seem to be hoping, and like this isn't like casting shade at these people because I can understand the logic, but like they're hoping that the big catastrophe gets preceded by a bunch of other smaller catastrophes. Like I really hope that like before AGI we have like some cyber attack that results in X number of fatalities or something, so that then people will get really freaked out and do something. And it's kind of like, I don't know, like that's such a like depressing sort of pessimistic theory of change that you think we need to see like people get killed or injured in order for people to take it seriously. And like if that's a foreseeable thing, we should be stopping now. That stuff happens. So that's just,
it's like, well, they think that like at that point then it would be easy enough to like solve the coordination problem, but for one thing, practically I think people do need to prepare people to like interpret it. Even if there was a cyber attack that killed a bunch of people, if people don't understand that like AI development in general is like posing that kind of risk, like then maybe, I don't know, we don't know what people make of that, you know. Like I still think like there's a role for always for like organizing and like laying this groundwork of like what would it mean, like that level of education. I think too, in the warning shot philosophy, like a lot of I'm not sure exactly like who is to thank for that, but there's a lot of similar language. I think it does come from like a couple of minds. But like they're probably looking to social movements that they just don't realize had more organization, like because it kind of is good for the narrative if it seems like the response to a warning shot or whatever, an inciting incident, is spontaneous, but generally it is not, you know. In like really successful social movements, like if you look deeply, like there's people who were already working on like they could anticipate that there would be events like this, and they were like working on what those, like in the civil rights movement, like a lot of people think of a lot of in the US civil rights movement, a lot of people think of a lot of the events as like spontaneous, but they were just very clearly, there's a historical record of how much they were not spontaneous, you know, like there were organizers working on it for a very long time. And there's a big network, and there was coordination between like the radical flank and the more moderates. And like there was so a lot of things that I think, because the way that history remembers it is like, oh, basically the story of the winner of the movement, you know, like this was unjust, you know, and like that was shown through these events, and finally people couldn't take it anymore, and then they demanded their rights, and like that was the end of it. I think like we can't like fall for that too much, is like how it works. Like you have to, there was deliberate work there. It's not like, and actually there's sort of that inevitability of like progress idea in this too, that like, oh, people would see that this was wrong. And like I think like a really clear-eyed view of history is like there are a lot of things that people will never see are wrong. You know, like there's no like way it's fated to turn out. Like feel this way about factory farming. Like that's an issue that like right now I think it's wrong, but like I also have to be aware that like the majority of people do not think that it's wrong, and it really could just continue. And like it's, I don't think it's obvious at all that like the arc of history bends toward justice on every issue. Like I think that justice has increased, you know, over history. So like maybe that's a way of saying that the arc of history is long but bends toward justice. But like, I don't know, for non-human animals, like maybe not. Like it just doesn't, it's not the idea that like that the right kind of moral progress is inevitable, I think is like, I think there is progress over time, but like I still think like we can't just view that our role is like turning the dial on that. Like that's it. Like I think you have to see it in a much more mechanistic way.
Yeah, I totally agree. Where should we go next? Oh yeah, what do you think
And we
are
could
like?
just all die from this problem, you know, like from
Yeah,
like truly, like it might not get solved. Like
yeah, yeah. What do you think are like the? Oh, no, actually, another thing what was first, just out of curiosity, like when you've been protesting outside OpenAI, have you like spoken to any employees, and like what do they like? What do they say?
they mostly avoided us. Like there were two exits, and we had like a small group at one exit and like the big group at the main exit. And I think they like instructed them to leave through like it's sort of like a bunch of buildings connected, and I think they were able to like leave through like other buildings or something. They must have, I mean, like almost no, or they just all work really late. But only a few employees came out of that exit, and one person was like right on. That was it. Other than that, we couldn't get them to interact with us. Whereas like at the meta protest, we had a lot of employee interaction. We were handing out like papers on like the problems with open sourcing, and like that got a lot of engagement from like the technical staff. They wanted to talk about that. And flyers, and like we, you know, like offered them if they wanted to like give us their emails, and like we didn't get, I think, any on that with employees. So in the past we had good employee engagement, and then the other protests that I did, it was aimed more at like engaging just people on the street. And that was good. We had some conversations. Yeah, I know some employees, and it's like a funky relationship now. Like the people who work at labs that like consider themselves, I don't really like using that term labs. It's shorter than AGI companies, but I don't like how it makes it sound like they're just doing science or something. They're not like a profit driven company with a goal of making AGI. But the companies that consider themselves more safety minded will like often like think of us as allies, and I am not sure if that's how I see it. And I feel weird about people working on the safety teams, because it is like I remember when we were asking like, is it okay to take these jobs, and it seemed obvious that like why wouldn't we want there to be a safety team at OpenAI? Why wouldn't we want there to be a safety team at DeepMind? You know, like it seemed obvious that there should be people like influencing inside the company, but God, that just turned out in a way that there were so many unanticipated side effects of that. Like those people became like the highest status people in AI safety, and they really got to have like a huge influence on what was considered to be progress in the field. And they just have really nice jobs, and they make a lot of money, and I'm sure it's like a more productive and motivating environment than just like doomery, you know, EA or rationality. And they gradually had their priorities like shifted from fundamental alignment to the stuff that goes fast, like doing development and then evaling, and that like feels really productive. And I like a number of people I know in safety roles have said things like this to me that I felt like, I mean, it was in the context of a larger argument, but they've said things like, essentially, like, this feels more productive. Like, that's what I'm hearing. Like, whether or not it like is the right thing to be doing, they're like, I would hate to go back to just like fumbling in the dark and doing like agent foundations or doing like totally theoretical stuff, because it just really seems like a lot of stuff is happening here. But like, it just feel like if you step back, like, is that enough? Is that the right direction? Like, I'm really not sure. So
Is there like, do you think there's anything to that? Like I forget who it is. Maybe it could be, I think it might be Scott Aronson has this thing where he talks about how he was like, this is the golden age of AI safety because only now are we developing the models to the extent that we can like do that kind of empirical work with them. And like, I don't know, I don't really have the technical knowledge to answer this question, but like maybe there is something to that idea that like doing this totally theoretical stuff isn't going to yield any results, whereas doing the simultaneous capabilities advancement with the safety work, maybe you do get further by doing that. Like I guess there could be something to that, but I can also see that that could be motivated reasoning of like, oh, I have this like really cool job and it's like so fun and I'm making all this money and I feel like I'm doing something because, you know, like you get like sense of productivity. But I don't know, like, do you think there's anything there?
So like this was like Dario Amadei's paradigm. I think he's like largely responsible for calling it the empirical paradigm or the empirical model or something like that. And I think like there's like a valid argument there. Like I came from a more empirical science, for example, and yeah, like trying to like deduce, you couldn't learn like nearly enough just theoretically thinking about evolutionary biology. Like you really need to know what did happen, and like you need to answer specific questions by like querying nature. But like there's just something kind of fucky about it. Like, so we have to make it so that what's the real argument for why we had to make it? Because somebody else would make it, you know. And like if we just if the goal is safety, like why not just not make it? And like we would have time to like do more theoretical approaches, or maybe we just can't, maybe it's not safe enough to make it all. I don't know, you know, even if like the right way to do safety on it would be empirical if you had do-overs, you know. But like maybe you don't. There's just, and so I think that like it's valid like in the mix of ideas, but like the fact that it makes billions of dollars worth of models along the way like just makes it way too appealing to people who, you know, whether or not they believe that is the right thing for safety or not. Like I, you know, would like believe that Dario believes this and like thinks this is the right thing and thinks that like, well, of course it's risky, but like it's also other people are making AGI, you know, so it's like that's risky too. And it's like, what's less risky? I would believe that, but just like, is everybody doing this like motivated by safety? Are they gonna do really good evals? Do we have the evals? Like, not really. Like, Anthropic hasn't figured out its plan yet for what it's gonna do. You know, it hasn't stopped it from going ahead with the empirical paradigm of development and then evaling. I think there's way too much faith placed in evals. I don't know why people love them so much, other than like the fact that you get to, I don't think it's only profit motive, but I think, you know, people have lots of reasons for wanting the models to exist. So, you know, like they just think they're really cool. It's much more fun than, you know, just waiting, possibly doing work that like never ends and never ends up in the model, because you can never have like affirmative proof of safety ahead of time. Yeah, I don't know. There's something like a little too pat about this when it came on the scene, I felt like, and a lot of people being like very confidently being like, oh yeah, you have to do it empirically, like just like this has been proven, and like as if this wasn't like a strategic and values choice as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess some people might think that we can do these empirical evaluations of the models as we're developing them, and then in doing that we'll realize that all of our like safety concerns were overblown to start with, because a lot of the sort of doom argument, I hate using the word speculative, but they are, I mean, like they're very theoretical. So like maybe we could hope that we would do all of this empirical research and then be like, oh, actually, like this isn't what we thought it was going to be. But I definitely wouldn't want to count on that. So yeah, I think I basically agree with you. I think it's like, yeah, it's there's definitely some motivated reasoning going on there to be like, we just have to make it so then we can study it because we have to make it because someone else might make it. Yeah, it's very like circular. Another...
Yeah, and there's kind of a missing mood there. Like, okay, if you're really concerned that someone else might make it, like maybe you could push for laws, like, or there might be other ways to like make sure that no one else makes it. There's still evident there, like the desire for it to be made, like, and not just. It bothers me. It bothered me to realize that there was so much of this going on where people weren't just thinking, even though for a long time, like the line in AI safety had been, this is about like saving everyone's lives and like everyone will die. And like, that's the problem with this. Like, there wasn't just an openness to like, what are the ways to save people's lives? Like it had to be through making AGI. Like and whether that's because the person really wanted it or they wanted the singularity and they thought that was like the birthright of humanity, or they wanted like no one else to die. Or it could just be that they said it was inevitable, like if someone's going to make it, there's no way you can stop it. Or it's because coordination problems are unsolvable or something like that. It just felt like no, I feel like what's really going on is like part of your motivation is that you really want to see this technology in the world. And it's not really about saving everyone's lives, which like, whatever, some of the earlier people, like in the more like singularity, like derived, AI safety group, like were pretty clear, like their motivation was to see, like a flourishing, like universal civilization. And they just wanted to see like cool stuff in the future. It wasn't really about like saving the lives of everyone on Earth at this time period, or you could have different values, of course, but I did feel like there was kind of a bait and switch. Like, I mean, the time that I was involved, it was really focused on saving everyone's lives. And it was when like EA was like interested in having AI safety as the top cause, it seemed like. And my personal take is that a lot of like long-termism was developed so that AI safety could be the top like utilitarian cause in EA. And there was a lot of talking about like not that, I mean, obviously I work on it, like I think there's like there is like an immediate danger, and like it is arguably, I mean, it's hard to imagine like what could rival it for like top cause as far as saving everyone's lives. But like, I just feel like a lot of people allowed that like morally, they allowed like the credibility of like saving people's lives and not wanting people alive today or like in like the next century or something to die, to like lend moral credibility to their arguments. But then when another way emerged to do that, like there's been a lot of reluctance, which I felt kind of betrayed by, like, like, oh, well, if it's not through, making an aligned super intelligence, then I'm not interested. Yeah, it really shocked me. I thought people would be like, wow, okay, cool. There's like this other option. And like, we haven't been beating our heads against the wall on this one for like, 2 decades. And so like, I'm really excited, like there's a lot of like, I don't know, I'm not ready for this to end, or even like just stuff like closer to home, like more piddling stuff, like, oh, my community is going to change a lot, because now a lot of people will be talking about AI safety and not just the smart people I'm used to. That might sound like a straw man, but that was a paraphrase of like a phrase that I was literally told in text once, and so I remember that very well. And then like a couple people also said this, like, it's fine to like, it's, of course you can have like weird grief about like even good stuff happening, because there's a change, but like, man, that disappointed me. I thought like, oh my God, you were just really like, was it ever about saving everyone's lives? Like, or was it just about like defining your social group?
Yeah. Wow. That's kind of incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot of just frankly like shitty dynamics and political dynamics, weirdly enough. That has really surprised me, just like dealing with the inside politics on this issue, and like who thinks they own this issue, and like what they think it's supposed to mean, or it's the heart, it's the like foundational story of a whole community.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of trouble that people are having, like moving that in what I think is like a more effective direction, or like keeping up with like what's happening and like the ability to actually like affect change on it.
Yeah. It's really interesting, just as like as someone who is like a total, or up until recently has been a total outsider, just to hear how many people have emotionally invested in the idea of the singularity and how long they've been invested in that. And like up until a year ago, I had never heard of that. Most people I know have never heard of that. You know what I mean? Like the vast majority of people do not think it is the birthright of humanity to like undergo that transformation and live in a like post-scarcity utopia where no one dies. Like, I mean, sure, like that sounds kind of cool, but like no, people are not, they're not expecting that. They don't think that that's like a they don't think we're like morally obligated as a species to bring that about. Like when I'm like shouting about wanting a pause on AI development, I'm not doing that because I'm worried we're going to lose out on that future. I'm just trying to preserve, my own life and live a sort of like normal 80-year lifespan for everyone else in my life to have that. So like that's just a very, very interesting like cultural phenomenon that I feel like most people are totally unaware of. And is definitely sounds like it's kind of clouding a lot of people's thinking. Because it is kind of like what like there's so like if things can really be like if there's that much infinite value on the table, you can justify doing like just about anything. And like I think that's kind of scary if people genuinely believe that that's like possible and imminent and that we just have to get to that. Like I can see that kind of like like corrupting people's thinking and making them act in slightly irrational ways.
Yeah, well, like Sam Altman, like people, he says things like, if we get this wrong, it could be lights out for everyone. And like the interpretation of the average person is like, he's like messing with us. Like he just wants us to think what he's doing is important or something, or he's trying to do regulatory capture or something. And I think it's just because my take on it is that they cannot understand that he really believes there's like infinite value on the line. Like, and so of course it could be worth everyone dying, like risking that, and it's just so hard for the average person to imagine that. In fact, I think like religious people who like in religions that have a heaven and a hell are like the closest place to understand like how, what they're thinking. Like I know non-zero people for whom contemplating pausing AI is like actually the first time they thought they might die. Which is, I grew up not in a moderate religion, but I like, I have exposure to like every, I have like fundamentalists in the family. My mom was raised kind of fundamentalist, and like, so like, I know what it's like to be around people who really believe that, like, I know that they like truly like, they truly think like there's a heaven or there's a hell, and like they obviously way more important than whatever happens in their life is just the only thing that really matters about their lives is like what it determines for their eternal fate. And I also know people who I think it's more realistic to think that like through cryonics or through a super intelligent machine you could have radical life extension, than it is to believe in like a metaphysical heaven or like a supernatural heaven. But the psychology is very similar. Like if you're asking people to the devastation of like, maybe I won't live forever. Like I know people who got into transhumanism like as teenagers, or their parents were transhumanists or something, and they just have never believed that they would die. I mean, they've like known it's a possibility, but they really think like, we're going to figure it out. Like I'm going to, one way or another, I'll be like cryopreserved and then brought back later when we have AGI or something like that. Or like AGI will happen in my lifetime and it'll like make everyone immortal. It's not that many people, but this is like kind of a California strain, a strain of like California religion. Or a lot of people come here because they were like part of transhumanist groups. And I like you, I don't have that. I just think like I'm concerned about like my natural lifespan, and I'm concerned about the suffering of like everyone else on Earth if something goes really bad. And I'm not I assume that like, you know, if we have enough time and if AGI doesn't destroy us, like we will have a flourishing civilization that like goes to other planets and stuff. And like that would be really great. But it's not like I'm not really oriented that much toward like making that happen or like being part of building that civilization. Like I'm more just about like the experiences of the beings along the way. So yeah, there's a lot of different values that were pretty obscured for the like long period where the focus was just alignment. And because if we're just working toward alignment and that's the only solution, then like not wanting everyone to die horribly or like not wanting the worst fates for Earth was like the same as working toward this like galactic, you know, civilization. But yeah, now it seems like now that there are more options, like the differences are becoming more clear, and there's like a weird theological dispute or like
Yeah, I really like that analogy, like the idea that like abandoning the hope of like living to see us enter the transhuman future is like a little bit of like deconverting from a religion or something. You have to like you like accept your mortality for the first time ever. Like I can see how like if that's
yeah,
really
can you imagine?
like,
I just yeah.
very that's probably like yeah very like psychologically destabilizing. But I mean, it just seems like the surest way to lose out on all that value. I mean, as a side note, I'm like skeptical about the idea of like utopia and whether that's achievable or what that even looks like. And I really don't think anyone's sold me on that being on what that's even going to look like. But if you do believe there's a utopia possible, then like hastily rushing to get it and like not taking adequate safety measures seems like the quickest fire way to lose out on that to lose out on that value anyway. So
yeah, I was literally told by someone kind of this persuasion that like a harm, this is really early when I was talking about pause, and I was like seriously like I was just asking around a lot, like doing essentially like a lot of interviews around Berkeley to like see if somebody could tell me like what's wrong with the pause position, and like a lot of people thought they had an answer, but like over time I was like no, I think this is it, you know, and like and then nobody else would really do it. But I talked to somebody who was like on the sort of transhumanist side, and a reason they gave that it was bad to delay AGI was that every year we wait, more galaxies are out of our reach because of the speed of light. Yeah.
Really, that's really
sorry, because of the expansion of the universe, you know, like they'd be like fundamentally out of our reach. And but like even that calculation has been done, it turns out, and like it's definitely better to wait and reduce your risk of catastrophe on Earth than to like try to access all the galaxies.
That's incredible. I don't have words for that.
But I think if you two things, like two reasons why you would want to push really hard now, it's like if it has to be you're like worried about dying and you're not just wanting like some people, you know, like the humans at the time of the singularity to be immortal and altruistically willing to die yourself, you know, that's a reason to push forward now. And then the other is like if you want to be in control, you know, it needs if it's like so much worse for somebody else to be in control of it, then like you should go forward as fast as you can. Perhaps, you know, if you're convinced that somebody else is like on your tail, you know. I think this is why the race dynamics is like a thing that the AI safety community is very comfortable pointing out, and like I think like they get it, or like they, you know, they see. So usually when you talk about the singularity, it's like, oh, the singularity like is basically aligned to like humanity's values and it like knows what's good. And and I did this too, and I can't believe this. I'm like, wow, this was so irrational, but I don't know. I wasn't thinking about it, I guess, like fully clearly, but I would treat it like any talk about the singularity, I would treat like it was just a hypothetical question about like a perfect God, you know, running things. And so I wouldn't like ask myself, like, wait a minute, if we actually like, what if there was a machine that like actually could, you know, it wouldn't of course be a God, but it like could actually run everything for us. Like we should be talking about that, like what that would be, not like, well, if it was truly aligned, you know, then it would do this, or then it would know that, or then it, like that was a line that like I would say and like other people would say. Yeah, and I still think there's not a lot of concrete thinking about like what this thing would be like, and that's just wild. I think it is like kind of slotting into our like religious mental modules, a lot of it kind of like messianic, like mental modules.
Yeah, yeah. No, whenever I've asked people like why should I be excited about the idea of having a super intelligent God dictate the universe, I tend to get really kind of like unsatisfactory answers that are like, well, it's so that it's going to know what's good for you way better than you could ever know what's good for you, and you're going to have a really great time. But because it's so smart, it's just going to figure it out, and like, trust me, it will be so great. And I just find that like so unconvincing. I don't like the idea of like being kind of like a subject that is just getting these like precise inputs put into my brain to make me feel great all the time is being sold to me. I really don't understand. I just can't picture it at all. But um
I
but then
kind
like me not, I don't know.
I sort of like the idea. If I just think I don't see myself ever really trusting that state of affairs. Like, because like, what if we drift out of alignment just a little bit? Like, if they're more powerful, if the delta in our capabilities is like that great, then I'm worried. Like, that's then we're toast. Like if we become misaligned and there's a super great power delta, just like multiply it by that, and like, so I just feel like I don't think we could like take on that liability. Like we just need agency like to protect ourselves, and like we need actual control over our fate to like really protect ourselves. But if you just give me the hypothetical question of like would I like to be taken care of and like experience great things, like as long as I could have like genuine connection with other people, which is I guess like the one thing that I'm worried would be like destroyed by that. Or if I knew I was like just in like uh, a simulator and like a holodeck, and like the people I was interacting with like didn't have sentience or something, like that would be a problem for me. But like if it's just like someone taking care of me and like making my life awesome, like that seems good to me. I just like think there's like
Yeah, I don't know. I guess
safety reasons that you can't.
I guess maybe this is just like I think I have an issue with the contrived nature of it. Like maybe it's just like something to do with everything being perfect and streamlined and there being no obstacles to overcome. Something about that seems really unappealing and kind of like boring to me.
You could have like a video game obstacle. Like a lot of the people who I know who are most interested in transhumanism like also really love like skilling up an agency. And they like imagine that they would just be doing that like in heaven. And they're Christian sects that also have this idea of heaven, like the Swedenborgians, like that the whole point of heaven is just like keep learning and growing. And like that's kind
Yeah.
of the vision that you usually hear. But yeah, I still feel like, isn't it like if you're not ultimately the agent in charge, like doesn't it that feel contrived? Like, I mean, so like my co-organizer for the OpenAI protest is no AGI, and he's mostly one guy, and his thing is that just there it would he would feel like he had lost meaning in life if there were no like genuine discoveries to be made, if nothing like genuinely had to be done by him, like that, signing up for having an AGI that could like take care of us would just like take away the point of life, like if you don't have any true agency. And I guess I don't fully share that feeling, but I feel that it's really important that this not be imposed on people who do have that feeling, like it's not
Yeah.
fair to impose, even if we like say that we did know how to like safely align AGI and like have the singularity, like there are some people who that is not compatible with their like terminal values and goals, and like that's really important. Like I don't think that you should like transform the whole earth without at least taking a vote on that, if there's and like if you introduce like a god like that, like is there any way to ever give back agency to the people who wanted it? Like even if they're like on an island and not subject to the god, like they'd still like change the world entirely. Like I'm not saying there's like a right answer to like who should get to decide that. I also think like I don't know, like a pretty strong determinist. I feel like you don't actually control a lot of things. So like, there's like lots of stuff in my life, in my own like mind and experience that I just fully accept that I don't control. But it doesn't even feel like I control them. I think many people feel like they control them, but I think you can like learn
Yeah,
to
I agree.
don't.
I don't think that we have like genuine free will or anything, but I think that the illusion of that is pretty strong and pretty like for most people's like psychological well-being or something. I don't really know. I don't know. Maybe if somebody can really paint me a picture of this utopia that I like genuinely find like compelling, I'm totally open to changing my mind on this. But
Well, on
again,
some
I'm quite
views,
like,
it would just be your utopia, like whatever it is, and
yeah, I
like
don't
a
know.
thing that some people are starting to work on post-singularity governance, some like philosophers like in these circles, and I think that's really good. Just anybody thinking a little bit more concretely about like what would this actually be, because like we just it was totally just a hand wave, for like so many years. But like I think like there's some like logical constraints on what it can be. Like for instance, if you really want to interact with like actual other sentient people, like they only have so much time, they might not want to interact with you. Like if your heaven is like getting to spend all your time with your unrequited love and like they don't love you back, like you can't get that, right? Like even in the singularity, like if like their will is also being respected. And one answer I've heard to this is that like probably the singularity will like that God will just like simulate everything, like all experiences that you have. And then I'm like, well, that's not my
well,
singularity then,
I
like
hate that.
like because like I would still it still would mean something to me that like the other person is experiencing this, or that it's like it's not like a contrived version of them that like gives me what I want. Like that I would want to feel real. Like and then like Sam Kirchner, the no AGI guy, like would wants like work to be real, and like there I think like valuing stuff that's real. Now we could all be deceived, but that doesn't seem so great anymore. That just seems pretty bad. Just that feels
Yeah,
more like the bad kind of matrix, but
yeah. Oh, I don't know. I find that so. I don't even like. I hate thinking about the idea of living in a a simulation with other people that are not, or either not sentient or wouldn't have otherwise like been like it's almost like they're not consenting to doing what they're doing because they're doing what I want them to do, and I know that they wouldn't have otherwise done it, and just there's like a
yeah,
whole rabbit hole
if
that
they
I like
are
don't even want to go
sentient,
down.
they're like doing stuff that the base person wouldn't have done, like then yeah, like it's just,
Yeah, it's just
so
no.
it just seems to me like there's fundamental things like that we want that can't all be satisfied simultaneously, like in a real way. They could
Yeah,
you could like get the experience, but like it I think that we do value like the reality and not just the experience, and so kind of tough. Like I think like there's still like you could edit our minds so that we don't want stuff that's incompatible, but like I don't want to do that, either.
yeah,
um it just
yeah,
seems like there's a lot of stuff that like falls apart, and it's the same kind of questions that people would ask about heaven, like if you got remarried in life, like who are you married to in heaven, like that kind of stuff, um like there heaven didn't I was never that into heaven when I was a Christian, because yeah, it just didn't seem real to me. Like a lot of stuff really compelled me. Like there being like a God that judges you felt 100% real to me. Like, but there being like a perfect place where everything's great. And it's just almost nobody talks about what's going to happen in heaven. It's just like, you'll be chill, like, and it's very similar vibe with the singularity.
yeah,
There's so much that I'm like now. So like I was never like into the singularity. I just kind of thought like, yeah, like maybe that'll happen, like if our progress continues, it does make sense that we'd eventually reach a level of technology that, it's like the meaning of the singularity, that it kind of it was like a phase change, but yeah, it was never same way that heaven was never really appealing to me. I just like have never been drawn to it so much. And so I've also never really thought deeply about like, what if that were real? Like, what if that were actually the situation? The only stuff that feels urgent to me about it is like alleviating people's suffering. Like
Yeah.
that I feel like of strong responsibility. Like, okay, even if it like took away like some of my pleasure through like authenticity or something, like it's definitely worth it. But like, but I do think that, yeah, like it's conceivable that you reach a point where like if you lose enough of like human experience, like, or enough of like the stakes of human experience, then like the suffering was the better deal, like, you know, or the dying was the better deal, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
Possibly.
that's like, I'm like, don't know enough about this to say, but it seems like alleviating suffering through things like, I don't know, drug discovery or getting better energy sources or whatever, are all things we could do through like narrow AI that's just kind of like trained to do a specific thing. Like that's a version of AI discovery that I find like super appealing, is one where we just kind of like intervene really surgically using, yeah, like AIs that are just trained to do one set of things. And I don't understand why we need this like generalized agentic thing. But that's like an irresponsible shortcut to me. Um, but I don't know.
Yeah. I if it's just a hypothetical question and it's like the choices between an AGI and then there's like these problems with like meaning versus narrow AI and then like but people still die eventually and like not every problem is not, you know, not every problem is solved. Like that feels more tough to me. Like I don't really know. Like I can see how people fall on either side of that. But I just also think like the risk of AGI is just so great that it just that is kind of a moot point, you know, like it just we shouldn't do it anyway because we don't know how to do it safely. So like we're
Yeah.
not there yet, you know. But like if it's just sort of like what's the best possible future, like I can kind of see it either way. Like I can see how like from where we are now, it would be a huge improvement for like people to live 1,000 years and for cancer to be cured and like but like but if you're still leaving on the table like all these other sources of suffering, like I think suffering's still bad, you know. So like I could see like why you want to push ahead to the stronger, more general agent. But yeah, but like again, in reality I think this is like totally moot because the narrow stuff is much safer. And I think like, you know, really chances are we just like set ourselves back hugely or like everyone dies because of trying to make the
Yeah.
API.
Yeah, I agree. I guess like, the utopian stuff is like fun to talk about, probably
Well, I think
premature
it's
before we've.
clarifying to know like what people have in mind because yeah, because if you're especially if you're going to go off of their judgments about like because a lot of these people are also the technical experts. So if you're like asking for their recommendations, like it's really important to know like what they think the payoff matrix is, like, and most people don't. Like most people have no clue that they might have the because they come across as very like secular people, but like most people have no clue that they're imagining like potentially infinite value to getting AGI right, like stuff that could make it worth like taking moonshots like while they're still alive, or you know. And I really think this is operative, like with like Dimitri Sabis is like a life extension guy, like that's pretty obvious, that's pretty open. Um, Probably Sam Altman, like I think like guiding the behavior of the AGI instigators, like the company CEOs and stuff, is a somewhat, you know, like singularitarian vision. um and that's, I mean, that's pretty scary. Like I think if the public like understood that they would be better placed to understand, like, you know, so when Sam Altman says there's like huge risk but he's still doing it, like I think a very natural interpretation of that is like he doesn't really believe there's like a big risk, like, or he wouldn't do that. Like he's got some other reason for saying that. um it's just really hard to understand, like, no, he's like either he's like a true believer in the singularity, or he just like his that the glory of it is like worth it to him. Like he's got a risk appetite that like most people like can't even imagine. um
Mm.
yeah, so I do think the discussion of like what is kind of the end game in people's minds is can be useful, like if you're trying to make sense of this whole space. Like that's an important thing, caveat to bear in mind, is that there's this like extensive not mainstream vision of the future that's very common in like the people who thought about AI, like AGI, long enough to like realize there were problems with it are like people who have this vision of the future where AGI is really prominent generally.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I really want to quickly get to, before we have to wrap up, what you think the best anti-pause counter arguments are, because I think I've seen you say that you find the compute overhang argument like at least a vaguely compelling objection, and I also find that idea kind of worrying, like the idea that algorithmic progress just gets so good that, you know, the more unscrupulous people could potentially just create AGI. I do think that's kind of worrying, although my technical knowledge is kind of like not good enough to know how much of a problem that actually is. But how do you respond to that if people bring it up?
This used to be like the main thing that people would bring up, and it's become less common. I don't know if it's because I like addressed it enough. I think not. I think it's just, it was like a really popular idea like around April of last year. Also, recently it's come up again because Sam Altman said that was a reason that OpenAI had the strategy it had. And then he proceeds to like want to have an alternate GPU supply chain, controls, which seems to undermine like, the idea that he was like trying to consume available resources so that we didn't have. So I guess the version of compute overhang means a lot of things. There's a great Less Wrong post called Taboo Compute Overhang that like goes over like how it means a million different things. But the best version, I think, is what you mentioned, algorithmic surplus. So like the idea that the algorithms get better and better at utilizing compute. So in effect, there's like more scale to a training run that gets done. And it used to be the concern was mainly like discontinuities. Like if you're doing that empirical method that we talked about earlier, sort of like that I associate with Dario Amodei, but a lot of now is like the main thing that the labs are doing, the AGI companies are doing, is that if you like had too much space between models you developed in that time, algorithms would get a lot better. So even if you were like scaling at the same rate with compute, you might get like a big discontinuity. And then like maybe that model is like a real danger model. And it's like, maybe it's like a day zero danger model and you weren't prepared because your previous model you looked at was like too different. And so you weren't like able to counteract whatever it does. I always thought that this was kind of weird. Like if the claim was that like you just have to look at the models empirically and like it's not enough to like study previous models to understand later models, like I don't know why they like, well, what's the point at all? Like, I mean, why do you think that like making them close together is gonna like give you like great insight? Like, couldn't a dangerous discontinuity happen at any time? I don't know. That's a little bit beside the point. But so the idea that with algorithmic surplus and pause is that like having a pause on the use of hardware or like with a hardware threshold could, if that pause was lifted or broken, algorithms will continue to get better in that time, and like any model made under those conditions would be effectively like a model made on a lot more compute, and it would maybe like be the danger model itself. I think like the biggest implication of this, which I think this is true, according to my understanding of the matter, I'm not like not that technical either on this issue. I think this is true, but the biggest thing I take away from it is that like maybe there are times, or like there'd be a point where it's too late to use a pause. Like if we thought we were like so close to breaking through that like actually it's better to just know where people are working on this legally instead of like worrying about where someone illegally is going to get together, compute, and like be in danger of making the danger model. Like that's one implication for me. I really don't think though that while it's like conceivable that there could be problems with implementing a pause due to algorithmic surplus, I generally think it's like still the better policy to go ahead. I think there's lots of things you can do with that time. You can like work on better enforcement, including maybe of algorithm development. You can work on like more robust societal institutions to deal with like breaking of pause. I still expect it to at least be an impediment to people working on danger models, potential danger models. So it could like buy us some time. On the whole, I'm not that worried about the pause being the thing that causes the discontinuity, and like that's really dangerous. And I guess just because I have some like base skepticism of the empirical model, and like the idea that I guess that it's that big of a difference from what we're already doing with that. Like they're already sort of clearing a minefield by taking a step at a time, and so like every time they step, they could hit it. And I don't think it's that different, taking the small increments than like the big increment, according to like my understanding of like what they do to deal with danger in the models. It's not like it makes the training process itself like that different. And so I don't really understand like what it gains them safety wise, like if it's a small step versus a large step. I also kind of suspect this whole thing was insincerely put forward as a reason by people who wanted to keep developing. Like, I mean, one of the proponents of this is Sam Altman in his own voice on, OpenAI's blog. I don't know. I don't know how sincere it ever was. Like, I know a lot of people like sincerely believed it because they like the empirical paradigm like became like the main paradigm, at least for a while. But it didn't seem to take into account like what else could be done with the time with the pause. Another thing it doesn't take into account is like, it's not like the supply chain, it's not like the amount of hardware is just going to keep increasing at the same rate. Like you'd see a lot of graphs explaining this that just show like a line, like of just like the rate of hardware production or like the amount of hardware that would be released. And clearly that would reduce if there were a pause. If it were not legal to run these huge training runs, like that is the main use of this hardware. Like they would not be making as many, they wouldn't just be stockpiling it. Even if they're stockpiling it, they're not going to be stockpiling it at the same rate. So like, it's not like what you would get is just like, hardware just continues going and then you make these much bigger algorithms and then you like put those together. Like also probably algorithmic progress would slow somewhat. I mean, I think it's somewhat dependent on the scale, like how you design algorithms and like what you have available to test and stuff. So like that would, the magnitude of the discontinuity in like inputs, I think was often exaggerated in a way that didn't really make sense. And then empirically, Jeffrey Hinninger from AI Impacts looked into this, like, are there examples of overhangs in other technologies? And pretty much found no, which I thought was, I mean, there's probably like a broader way you can construe the question where you would find, like, I'm sure like stockpiling weapons has happened before, and like that would be maybe instructive. Like if people are really motivated, they really think they're going to need them, for later, and they keep producing them. I would still expect there to be like a decline in production, so I'm sure it's not like, he did an exhaustive search of everything, and that kind of research is pretty difficult, and it's hard to like know that you have like a complete set or you're looking at all the right things. But like the fact that it wasn't really wasn't obvious in any of the examples that they identified also I think counts for something. There'd be a loss of talent during that time. Like a lot of people would just get new jobs, instead of like being on hold like at the AGI company, like waiting to implement new algorithm. Like there's just a lot of things that I think the pause would actually slow down and diminish. So I think like the risk is not as high as perhaps portrayed. But overall, I want to say like, yes, this is an objection that I think like there's something to it. Like conceivably, it could make the situation harder, like if a pause couldn't be enforced or something like that. And it's something that should definitely be taken into consideration when designing a pause.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting, that thing about there being no previous examples of overhang in other technologies. I'd not heard that. But that's good to know.
This is just, like this is just one report, that wasn't like exhaustive, and maybe they'll turn up better examples like because of having put it out. But yeah, it was interesting. It just seemed like there wasn't much.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Yeah, so I guess it's definitely not the like checkmate that people seem to think it is. Are there any, like, just before we wrap up, are there any other like counter arguments which you think like have kind of given you I was gonna say like giving you pause, and I was like unintentional pun. But yeah, like are there any others that you're like, okay, yeah, like there's something to that?
Um, so I think like it is a risk that I'm running by just trying to bring attention to this, that like it could become like catastrophically polarized. Like if Donald Trump was like, I like these, I'm a PauseAI person, like that, like it would, like it would just instantly become like, you know, like you're a MAGA person, you know, like like that could happen, you know, like you could just be like incredibly unlucky and get like tagged as like one side or the other. That seems possible. I suppose like a lot of people consider that risk like killer and like a reason I shouldn't do it, or I should only be like trying to affect like selective audiences. I think that like we're not going to hide this issue from other people, like, and that's a very like weird and old way of thinking about this. Like there will be other people to talk about AI and like AI danger, and like I think that we will do a better job than they will. And so I figure like we're pretty much, everyone's running that risk. Like the issue could become polarized, and it's not. It's like we're kind of kidding ourselves to think that that's mainly in our control, whether that happens or not. That could be dismissing it too much. I'm not sure, but that, so just unlucky stuff like that, that like when you kind of submit yourself to the public arena, like could happen, concern me. But at the same time, I don't like, I don't think that I'm doing things that are, I think I'm keeping it pretty moderate and like not roping in other issues and stuff that would identify PauseAI as like red or blue. And I don't know what I really ought to do differently or to prevent this other than that. Other things that are actually bad or actual risks. Yeah, a lot of people think that protesting is like a big risk, and I just don't really understand it. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Like, I think like
on that one either.
yeah, I don't really understand it. I'm just used to there being more protests for more things, like, and I guess like in Silicon Valley, like that's not part of the culture so much, and so like people, yeah, I don't know, have like very different reactions to it. Like I'm used to there just being lots of protests for lots of things a lot of the time, and this is just like a normal form of speech, and that it gets a lot of media attention just because like of the issue, and like there not being protests on this issue before. But yeah, so I'm not really worried about that. The bad things about pause. I mean, the idea of getting terrible regulations like stuck in place like is somewhat bad, but I can't bring myself to worry about it that much with like the level of risk that we're talking about. Like I find it very weird when people object with this. They're like, well, regulations are sometimes bad. Like look at nuclear power. It's been like held back so much because people were reacted. And I'm like, okay, but like, is the world like exploded dead? I like, it seems like for one, I think like, I don't know, like I'm not criticizing people for like the calibration of their reaction to nuclear risk. Like I think that they were right to be really concerned. And then like we are getting new nuclear power plants, so it's just like it just delayed the use of nuclear power. And I'm like, do you really think like carbon, you know, emissions are like that bad that it was worth like that the anti-nuclear people should have like taken a chill pill? I don't think so, you know. Like I just I don't know. It's like really hard for me to take that seriously. It's weird because it's usually coming from people who like are really serious about, you know, or have like really short timelines and stuff, or like for AI risk. And I'm like, but you're worried about if we just like don't get the maximum safe amount of AGI. Like I don't like I think a lot of that comes down to just like a very maximizing mindset, and like I'm more of a satisfizer, or I'm more risk averse, and I think that's the right position on this. Like we shouldn't, it's like silly to try to get like that extra little bit of precision when like we really just need to be focusing on like getting on the right like side of this issue, like alive, dead, you know.
Yeah, it's funny. I just feel like some people, I've both heard it's impossible to regulate AGI and we'll never stop it, and also we should be really careful about over regulating AGI development and like locking in bad regulations, and it's going to be like nuclear power and everyone will be scared of it for everyone ever. Like those things can't both be true, but I like
so frequently have someone start with the first one and then they end with the last one, and I don't get it at all.
and
like,
it's like the same people. I think it's confusing.
Yeah, it's the same person in the same mind. I think I'm like on a podcast explaining that very thing that like people do this a lot. Yeah, it's like I feel well, what I feel like that reveals is that what they're actually getting at is like having the correct attitude toward risk, like instead of like where should we land on this issue, or like what's safe on this issue. And like, so yeah, I just think of it as like it like way overly intellectualized approach to like the actual danger here. Like I don't know how they don't assign like a much lower value to the risk of we overdo it and don't have AGI for like some people are like, I think the win condition of humanity is to have AGI, you know, like, and there would be something seriously lost if that never happened. So like two things there. I think with a pause, I think the most likely thing with a pause is that we take the time necessary, and that is what makes it possible to have AGI, you know, or like the most advanced technology we can safely have out of this. Like, so it's not like, I don't know why people who are concerned about just humanity ever having AGI would be worried about not getting it as soon as possible right now. Like that seems like incompatible. Like you want it to be done well, right? Like so that it can last. So like I don't see like a pause is at all at odds with like a future you know, human civilization having AGI. But also like if it's not safe, then what? Do you just think our lives are like worthless now, or like not, you know, like if it was just this. And I have heard this sentiment. I have heard like more than one person has said to me like express disappointment, like if they just get old and retire, like they would almost be better to die in the apocalypse than to get old and retire. Like you know, like that's people like not face to face have said this, like yes, that's what I think, like online, and then like face to face, like friends of mine have like expressed kind of like wouldn't it be a letdown if we just got old and retired, like implying that like it would be in some ways like more disappointing than like dying in the apocalypse like soon, you know. Like either it's we die in the apocalypse or we go to heaven. And that's a very common, at least for Western people, that's like a very common dichotomy. Like either you die in the rapture or you know go to heaven forever. But like to not be in the time of the rapture, you know, would be like very upsetting. Like
very, very strange. Yeah. No, I don't get that at all. I'm very conscious of your time because we've gone for nearly 2 hours now. But yeah, I feel like people probably know where to find you, but just in case they don't know where to find you, maybe you can just let people know.
Yeah, so I am on Twitter at Ilex_Ulmus, ILEX_ULMUS. And there's also at PauseAI US all together on Twitter for the official org. Yeah, that's probably where you should contact me.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've seen the PauseAI US account's kind of recent, isn't it? So
yeah, it's quite recent.
I'll put that in the description so people can go and follow that. But yeah, this is really fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.